What's your take on who's being sent to these meetings and whether or not they're going to be productive?
Well, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing if the United States and Iran are actually talking as opposed to simply tweeting at each other, nasty things that suggest a breakdown. But we've seen this movie before, heading into a week in which I think the president is probably concerned about market reaction. He wants to send a positive signal that maybe at a minimum these talks could be extended and the ceasefire could continue. But the fundamental problem, and there are two of them, have not been addressed. One is that the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. And there's no indication that unless the United States puts something serious on the table to compensate Iran in some way, sanctions relief or something else, that the Iranians are inclined to open it. And second, this nuclear material, which we've talked about for weeks now, highly enriched uranium that Iran retains, despite the United States having bombed it many times and told Iran they have to give this up in order for the war to end. Those are the two big issues in the talks, and we don't seem any closer to resolving them.
John, I want to ask you about realism in the context of these negotiations. And you have a deep familiarity, of course, with negotiations involving the Iranians. And we've talked over the last few weekends just about the amount of time it took to get to the JCPOA agreement. This was something we measured in months, not in weeks or days, as it seems like we're trying to do here. So I'm curious what you observed about that first round of talks when the vice president went to Pakistan, emerged from those meetings with nothing to show for them. Now we have Steve Witkoff going there. What does it say to you about how we should be thinking realistically about the way that these two sides can come to some sort of agreement here to stop the fighting in the Middle East?
Well, as you said, I was part of negotiations with Iran that took place over a period of several years. Even the final phase of the negotiations to reach the Iran nuclear deal back in 2015 took 19 consecutive days for the Secretary of State deployed to Vienna to really just finish off the last few issues in the talks. It was the longest any Secretary of State, John Kerry in that case, had ever been outside the country in one place in the history of the United States. Negotiations with the Iranians take time, they take patience, they take expertise, and airdropping the vice president into Pakistan for one day was never going to get the job done. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if J.D. Vance does not go to this round. The vice president has many wide-ranging responsibilities, probably can't just live in Pakistan for long enough to get a deal like this done. But whoever goes is going to have to treat this as a serious, detailed, technical exercise. The Iranians know what they're looking for. They know the file, and they are going to be willing to put in the time. We have to be willing to take that same approach.
Talk to us about the technical aspect of that, because one of the criticisms I've heard from people inside the State Department and at the IAEA is that Steve Witkoff may be very good at negotiating in his private sector life, but he's not a technical expert. He does not know the ins and outs of nuclear material, how to move it, enrichment levels, things like that. And they're not bringing those experts with them, even for these brief stints of negotiations. Do you think, have you heard concern that they don't have the knowledge base to successfully carry out these negotiations? Is there a chance they're going to get hoodwinked by the Iranians?
Well, look, not every negotiator can be an expert on all of the different elements involved in these talks. There are technical issues regarding nuclear physics and the inputs to a potential nuclear weapon. There are technical sanctions issues, legal technicalities about how you would give Iran maybe sanctions relief in some cases and not in others. Very careful wording. You don't need to be an expert in all those things, but as you just said, what you do need is expertise in the team while you're negotiating so that you can check Iranian demands against somebody who really does know the ins and outs and what the implications of a concession or a demand might be. And one of the problems in this administration is they don't seem to have a lot of respect for expertise. Many experts in the U.S. government have been driven out of their jobs during the course of the first 1 year plus of the Trump administration. So whether there are even enough people left in these buildings to be able to help the talks is one question. Whether, if they are there, they're going to be brought to Pakistan, I think, is another. And if you just look at the history of how these talks have gone up till now, they don't seem to be relying too heavily on experts. They go by vibes, they go by feel, and that has not worked out so well so far.
John, indulge me for a moment here. You've done enough cable news to know that the president tweets or posts we have to read from it if it's germane to what we're talking about here. So we have a very lengthy post here on Truth Social from the president. I'm going to read from it. He addresses what we were covering yesterday. Shots fired on these two ships in the Strait of Hormuz. That wasn't nice, was it? The president writes. He announces his representatives are going to Islamabad, Pakistan. They're going to be there tomorrow evening for negotiations. Then he gets into who actually has closed the strait here. He says Iran has announced they're closing it. He says the U.S. has closed it because a blockade was already in place. Then he talks about a deal. We're offering a very fair and reasonable deal, the president writes, and I hope they take it, because if they don't, the United States is going to knock out every single power plant, every single bridge in Iran. No more Mr. Nice Guy, President Trump writes. They'll come down fast, they'll come down easy, and if they don't take the deal, all caps, it will be my honor to do what has to be done, which should have been done to Iran by other presidents for the last 47 years. It's time for the Iranian killing machine, to end. John, let me ask you about the deal. The president, again, putting it in all caps there, and I think that's something that stymied me, perhaps Christina, over the course of the weekend. What deal is on the table, if any, what the president's talking about? We've heard about nuclear dust. We've heard about not having a nuclear program. Is it clear to you, as somebody who was in government for a long time, continues to follow all of this, what, in fact, the United States wants in a deal with Iran at this moment?
So the fundamentals of any deal with Iran, when it comes to their nuclear program, when it comes to ending this war, by the way, when it came to the deal that President Obama negotiated with the Iranians back in 2015, is some measure of sanctions relief that benefits the Iranian economy. That is what they are negotiating for. They fought a war to be able to preserve their nuclear program as it currently exists, to preserve their government. And the only way that they are going to stop resisting traffic going through the strait is if they are given some sort of compensation that allows them to begin rebuilding their country. There's been tremendous amount of damage done, yes, to Iran's military, but also to many of Iran's civilian structures and requirements. And they're going to demand some sort of financial benefit from that, whether that's a toll going through the strait or sanctions relief. They're under tremendous sanctions pressure from the United States. On the U.S. side, they want two things. They want traffic resuming through the Strait of Hormuz so the global economy can go back to at least a version of what it was before this war. And they would like Iran to part with 1,000 pounds, 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium that Iran retains, that give it a relatively short pathway to a nuclear weapon, or to enough material for a nuclear weapon if they choose to do that. So those are the two sides. It's not actually all that complicated at the end of the day. And so what I would imagine is the United States is putting some versions of financial packages on the table that would benefit the Iranian economy. And if the Iranians decide it's enough, they may well take that deal. If they don't, I think they believe that time is on their side, and the economic pain being caused by the war hurts the United States and its partners and allies more than it hurts Iran.